So Highguard is finally released to PC and consoles, much to everyone's surprise, and despite the controversy surrounding its debut trailer at the Game Awards, I think Highguard is actually a surprisingly fun game. Simply put, Highguard is a 3 vs 3 player vs player raid shooter focused around a very simple cycle. Loot the map until the special sword spawns, capture that sword, and drive it into the heart of the enemy base. From there, you systematically destroy the objectives within the base until you achieve total victory. It's an interesting mix of Apex Legends style combat and MOBA map control. Am I saying it's a completely new experience? No, but it's definitely more interesting than the standard Call of Duty or Battlefield that we get every single year, or any of their AA equivalent. Now, I've heard some players saying that Highguard is overcomplicated, that the looting is too complex, that there's just too much going on at once, and after a few games, I kinda have to disagree. The loot is really just two systems, weapons and armor. The weapons are very basic and don't really cross into each other's roles, meaning better loot is as simple as better color. Meanwhile, the armor literally stacks on top of itself and repairs automatically from your inventory. There's virtually zero inventory management to speak of, no Apex Legends shield swapping, no looting enemy characters of any kind. Where it starts to get complex is the raid tools, and there's 3 of these, each with a very unique purpose, but none of them are tied to a specific hero. And maybe that's the issue some players are running into. Too much freedom, not enough structure, and the only real metric of success is the timer on the screen, which means being very efficient with your time, knowing what loot you want and how to get it is rewarded. If you have trouble finding loot, there's an underlying currency system that you can mine ore to purchase upgrades from shops around the map, but it's usually supplemental, though it can be useful for restocking on shield charges in the later portions of the game. If anything, the mining system being so basic is really what rubs some players the wrong way, because it's a central mechanic to getting your loot. Or you could be cruising around the map trying to unlock chests and hoping you get lucky with a better weapon, but that is ultimately an inefficient way to do that. Now, the gunplay itself is actually top-notch. I found it very visceral and responsive. This same game with worse shooting would be a complete dud, but when you can have high-impact moments like this...
Enemy is planting a bomb. Better stop them. Listen up. Bombs counting down. Stop it.
Bitch. I find it hard to argue with the dev's vision, but we're arguing with the execution. I also appreciate that the available weapons are pretty simple and they don't cross over into each other's niche, so getting the loot you want is a task of just getting the better rarity. On top of this, each of the 8 heroes has pretty unique power sets from each other, which lean towards certain weapons. You've seen a lot of these abilities before, but they don't really cross over into each other, which leads to a lot of interesting character interactions. And on top of that, you have the base system, which adds another layer of strategy in combination with the heroes and the weapons. In the beginning of each match, you'll choose from 4 random bases, and I believe the maps you play on are portions of a larger map that are situated between these 2 bases. And these bases can greatly influence your hero performance, since sometimes they'll put the targets in the low ground or in the high ground, sometimes they'll be deep in the back of your base, or sometimes they'll be at the very front. And that means if people take the time to learn this game, there's going to be very high skill expression with a lot of player creativity. Now, since the trend is to be overly negative about Highguard, and I'm sure everyone thinks I'm glazing the game by now, let's go ahead and get into some of the negatives, some issues that I personally have with the game. First, the looting aspect is undeniably a filter. I get what the game is and I enjoy what the game is, and they tried to consolidate the system, but some people are simply not going to enjoy the process. This leads to the false negative of player count complaint, because some people want this game to be a 5v5 or maybe even 4 teams of 3, or maybe even just a big team battle like 12 versus 12. But I feel like the longer you engage with the system, such as the horse, the more used you get to the pace of the game, suddenly you realize the map isn't actually that small. When you're playing actively and fighting a more coordinated team, the game can get pretty intense. But this complaint tells me that people simply reject the looting aspect of Highguard, which is odd to me since it's so Apex Legends coded. Tell me how you feel about that in the comments, but one of the aspects that isn't Apex Legends coded is the armor system. When you collect armor in Highguard, it actually stacks in your inventory and will heal you automatically. There's no shield cells or anything like that. But it makes me question, why don't weapons actually do this? From the beginning of the game, you choose your loadout, and then you go and you search for higher class weapons, but sometimes you just find basic weapons out there in the wild. And it'd be way better if you collected 3 weapons or 5 weapons and just upgraded into the next rarity. Otherwise, the late game meta really becomes collecting crystals and raiding the shops, which is truthfully the least interesting and developed part of the loot system. Ironically, I think that system could be fleshed out by adding more MOBA elements, such as roaming mobs that you could collect currency from, or maybe even fill a meter on your weapon that upgrades it to the next rarity. As it stands right now, if players don't actually understand how to efficiently loot, they feel like there's just nothing going on in those first 4 to 5 minutes before the shield breaker arrives. There could also be more tower defense aspects to the actual raiding portion of this game, whether that be turrets or setting up hard defenses or maybe even minor amounts of base building, which I did read that they had at some point in the game but removed. A lot of this game strikes me like they had a huge vision for what it could be and slowly cut it down to the reality of what they could develop. But I truly think if this game wants a chance to stake its claim, it has to go much heavier on the attack and defense portions of this game and the mechanics surrounding that to really define itself, to show what makes it unique from other FPS on the market. Now, some of the hero designs are pretty generic, but because there's only 8 heroes in the roster, they are pretty unique from each other and operate pretty differently within the gameplay. But I will say that the lack of lore hurts the characters. In games like Apex Legends, Overwatch, and of course Marvel Rivals, you're gonna have cinematics and comic books and animations that help to flesh out the world, and there really hasn't been any of that around Highguard, probably because the response for the debut was so bad at the Game Awards that it scared them away from sharing anything about the characters, the world, and the point of the game. Now, honestly, I think the policy of silence was probably the best thing for them because it just increased curiosity. More people tried the game on launch day than I think would have if they had released any material beforehand, because they would have just been relentlessly mocked on social media. This does lead into another issue that many players have with the game, and it is the classic live service monetization. And I know for a fact that this made some players close the game immediately. Even though the battle pass is free, the precedent of launching games with $20 legendary skins with the game itself is pretty bare bones, and even non-functional for some players, is always going to be atonal, and it's the risk you take with games as a service. Gone are the days of launch a game first, improve it over the course of the year, but make sure that the item shop and the MTX are there day one. And talking about some of the actual performance issues that I had, some of the map geometry feels unpolished. There's many situations where you get stuck or slowed by terrain, especially when you're riding on horseback. I also had some iffy situations with the vertical audio, and for some reason this is a huge issue in most games. But in Highguard in particular, I found myself chasing people the wrong direction sometimes. And you can call it skill issue if you want, but it never happened when we were in the field or fighting around rocks or anything like that. It was only really in the bases. Now, I play on console, Xbox Series X, but I have heard about many PC issues, and it's just crazy how so many games launch in an unoptimized state, and people are spending thousands of dollars on these rigs only to get mid-performance. On top of some visual bugs and crashes, you also have some weird quirks like no toggle aim on mouse, or even higher FOV when you plug a controller into a PC. But for some reason, when you're playing on console, you don't have an FOV slider at all. At the same time, you can only upgrade your sensitivity linearly. There's no way to change your Y or X axis independently that I personally could find. Again, could be a skill issue, but it only happened with this game. But I think the biggest issue with Highguard is that it's just this. Only this. It's pretty fun, probably a few dozen hours fun. But is it really going to be something you're playing in 6 months? I will note that the developers put out a roadmap for their first year of the game, which is good that they have a lot of content planned for the future. It remains to be seen if Highguard will actually hold a consistent audience. For what it's worth, I think the 3v3 format actually helps it here, because you don't need as large of a player base to keep the game running, to field matches, and to keep people invested with things like ranked mode or leaderboards. There's quite a few games that I've seen survive 4, 5 years and beyond with a player base of 10 to 20, 30,000 players. Now before we go, I want to address the huge elephant in the room, that being the massive controversy and really undeserved hate around Highguard. And undeniably, a large portion of this came down to the trailer placement at the Game Awards. It was the final trailer before the actual Game Award was game out. Jeff Keighley really advocated for this game in his speech, and personally, I think a lot of people thought it was going to be Elder Scrolls. I know I thought it was going to be Elder Scrolls for about 10 seconds there. I mean, listen to this quote from the Dorito Pope himself.
You know, sometimes our last reveal at the Game Awards is a teaser for something years and years away. Not tonight.
The real problem is the way that social media works now. It's all about engagement farming. And really, that just incentivizes people to follow the crowd and popular opinion, especially if they're verified on Twitter, because your income is codependent on how much interaction you get from other verified accounts, which causes them to willingly form echo chambers and just support each other's opinions to signal boost. Of course, we have the massive amount of negative Steam reviews, and it's hard to take this volume of reviews with a lot of credence, because you have a whole culture now of people rushing to be the first to put a funny review on a game, to screen cap it and put it on Twitter so that they can get traction in the algorithm. And of course, when you have a meme as snappy as Concord 2, it's very easy to get that traction. But this game really isn't Concord 2. It's not trying to be a generic hero shooter. It's a pretty unique game mode in the space. And on top of that, it's free to play, and it's not made by a major publisher. It's not a AAA production by Sony. It's self-published by Wildlight Studios, and though they have a lot of clout independently with the lead creatives, they are a brand new development team. So at best, we could call this a AA studio. This is actually the AA productions people are supposedly asking for. Highguard is the true embodiment of a 7 out of 10. Above average mechanics and visuals, a unique gameplay loop that will filter many players. But in the end, it's doing something that no other game really is. Unfortunately, live service games need to launch as 9 out of 10s now. No one really wants to give games time to grow anymore. They want a complete vision delivered on day one, at the highest quality that can possibly be mustered, and that's regardless of your talent level or resources. In a huge way, the open comparisons to Apex Legends and Titanfall really hurt the crowd reception to Highguard, because it set itself to a bar that it simply could not match. If you're an FPS fan or a PvP raid fan, then this game is definitely a beautiful skeleton. I recommend giving it a shot before it ends of service, and maybe if enough players actually do interact with it, it can stay alive for a couple years. Because as I stated before, when you're talking about a 3v3 game, you simply don't need as big of a player base. We also have to consider that this isn't a AAA studio, so they need less income to survive and continue producing content. So I personally hope that Highguard finds its way with the player base and collects a niche of content creators, streamers, players, a community that wants to interact with each other. And I do kind of see the rumblings of Highguard apologists out there in the comments. And I'll be real, one of the reasons I made this video is because I think Highguard is supremely underrated, but when there's so much negativity around you, it's hard not to be underrated, right? Everyone wants this game to fail, but I think it has a chance to find its way. Tell me what you think in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and maybe check out my latest video on Marvel Rivals, where I tried out Tank Deadpool. Tank Deadpool is considered to be the worst Deadpool in Marvel Rivals, but I think he's my personal favorite. He has some game-changing abilities that can definitely turn the tide of battle, and I'll show you how to use them to their maximum potential.